Did you use an AI agent to do your holiday shopping last year? Probably not. But did you use an AI-powered LLM to help you search for products? You probably did. What about communicating with an AI-powered chatbot on a retailer's website? Would you even know if you did? AI is already disrupting online shopping for consumers and brands. And we're just getting started. We're talking today with Doug Straton, CMO of Bazaarvoice, about what's happening now and what's yet to come. Welcome to Conversations with MarTech.
My name is Doug Straton. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of Bazaarvoice. I'm a 30-year veteran of CPG, 5 years in software the past couple of years. Essentially, Bazaarvoice is the world's most trusted network of authentic consumer voices. And what that means is we source, verify, and amplify product ratings, reviews, photos, and videos at scale to drive traffic, reach, and conversion for our clients, and essentially allow their products to be discovered, be trusted, and then be chosen either by shoppers, human shoppers, or by AI.
All right. Thanks for joining us, Doug. We're going to start with some numbers because you guys did some research on how consumers used AI in their shopping. And let's talk about what you found. And I want to say, we were on the receiving end of so much research leading up to the 2025 holiday season about people using AI agents to buy. I think maybe the definitions were a little skewed there about, like, you doing research on an LLM. That's not the same as using an agent to buy. But anyway, a lot of people were excited about it. I don't know anyone who actually used an agent to buy something, but let's hear what you guys found.
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing about that is agents is getting thrown around a lot, but you have to actually have a definition around, like, an agent. Agent is when you're allowing the machine essentially to make a decision and take an action on your behalf with your hands off the wheel, essentially. And so I think people automatically, conflate the, general AI and generative summaries with agentic, and they're actually very distinct and need to be treated distinctively. What we did is we did some research with eMarketer, and if anybody's interested, they can go to bazaarvoice.com website and look up some of the blogs on this. But there's some really interesting findings. Shoppers are really no longer typing fragmented keywords. They're already very easily thinking about expressing their intent. And I think even prior to AI, that was starting to happen. People would throw in some fairly sophisticated questions into general search, and they would get, still a list of things, but it was getting very good at narrowing those things down. The difference now is that, the response is different fundamentally. And essentially 83% of shoppers have used AI, generative tools, personalized recommendations, voice assistants in the last 6 months. That's a pretty expansive, I would say, definition of AI generally. In a lot of cases, they don't even think they're using AI, but they in fact are. And when they turn to these tools, they're using it for various different things. So about 40% use it for shopping, 44% use it for product comparisons. The one thing that we see, and we're lucky because we're in this business, is that trust is continuing to remain the primary currency in terms of how people respond to certain types of information. So AI makes discovery really easy for consumers, but the burden of proof in terms of whether you're going to trust what you're seeing is still on the brand. And then the brand actually working with consumers to understand and use their sentiment in some of these answers.
All right. Yeah, I think on the query part, I think it's about 4 times longer a query from general search to an LLM. I've seen like 6 words average in general search queries and about 24 words average in an LLM. So much more detailed when people are typing into an LLM.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and in talking with the LLMs, and then also doing our research, exactly to your point. There's certain things I think people are starting to differentiate between, like, traditional search can actually be much more efficient, more effective for certain types of things versus, say, something where you're getting a little bit more detailed and you're expecting more of a detailed answer. And how these different players balance those two things, I think, is going to be really, really interesting, because I think there's still a need for the different modalities.
Consumers tend to move first, right? So we saw ChatGPT got released. People started using it almost immediately. It started to replace some of their general search queries. And then businesses have to catch up with what consumers do. So how large is the gap between consumer use of AI as shoppers and how the brands react to that and the way that they use AI as merchants?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So clearly the adoption's really fast. About 54% of shoppers use AI as like a research supplement. And there are people, to your point, that have already kind of replaced traditional search with mostly generative AI. It's still a subset, but it's around 18%, according to our research, which is fairly large. But I think that the way we need to think about consumers versus how brands are thinking about is, the consumer use case is about making their life easier, and then in terms of brands and retailers, it's more of an internal use case, like how to make my job easier. So they're really focused on like the productivity gains. At least initially, they've been focused on productivity gains versus like how do I use this to actually make my interactions with people better. And whether you're a brand or a retailer, which is also a brand, gives you different options as well. But on the merchant side, it's really AI is really concentrated in pockets. So, media optimization, internal productivity tools, experimentation with chat features is really the area where they're probably leaning in the most with consumers, and then ultimately that will turn into more agentic type experiences. But that's kind of the limit right now. There's a huge appetite for it, but I think in a lot of cases they feel a little bit held back because they're worried about like the legal ramifications of uses of certain types of data and certain types of expressions, and whether or not they can rely on the models to have the appropriate guardrails in place to essentially make those experiences both really great for the consumer, but also safe for the brand or the retailer. I think there's a huge opportunity gap. If you've got AI is influencing, about 74% of shoppers. It's not necessarily the sole driver of a final sale, but it's playing a role, certainly. And I think the ability to hand off that experience and continue that experience in a really robust way, whether you're a brand or retailer, is going to become really, really important. But right now, that people will use these tools. They don't stay in the AI environments. They actually exit the AI environments and go to different environments and actually do their shopping. I think those things ultimately will probably come together over time. But right now, there is a big gap between the initial use and then essentially the experiential and then transactional use with brands and retailers.
And if you're a merchant, that initial use, you're looking for a product or a product category, whether you call it AEO or GEO or AI SEO, there is this growing movement to ensure you get listed in those LLM responses, because if that's where people start, and if you're not there, the chance that you're going to close the sale diminishes quite a bit. So are brands using these techniques? Are they following the good SEO is good AEO idea? What's your sense?
Yeah, I think it goes back to something that we mentioned a few minutes ago is understanding the difference between AEO, which is agentic engine optimization, versus generative engine optimization. They're kind of stuck together right now, but they're actually going to be two different things, because agentic is, again, AI is able to take a decision or take an action on your behalf independently. And that's a little bit different than being surfaced in a summary, for example, from a discovery perspective. So I think those will actually be two distinct areas of expertise. But right now, what you're referring to, and the predominant way to think about it, and probably the place where most people really need to start, because it's going to take a while for agentic to really, truly take off, is around how do they get share of shelf? Like, just, as you go into a store, you want to be at eye level, you want to be visible, you want to be on an end cap. And in the digital sense, that moved to, I want to be on the first page of search results. And now, which could be about 10 things. And now, it's going to be between 3 or 5 things that are going to be mentioned in a summary, and you want to be one of those. And I do think a lot of the fundamentals from SEO are a good place to start. The difference you need to think about is, instead of you're sifting through links, shoppers are turning to those AI assistants for answers. And ultimately what drives, the spending behaviors, the quality of the information behind the AI. And so brands do understand that this is shift, but it's really difficult for everybody to kind of get their heads around, like, where do you start from a strategic standpoint? So you can start with SEO, but ultimately you have to be much more diligent. It already rewards much tighter data governance and much more structured data, particularly product related data. So understanding how all that really works, all the content related to those products really works and gets connected and gets used in a much more dynamic way. Everybody could have their own version of a product detail page, for example. It could look very different to you, Mike, than it would to me. And you have to start to build for that future if you haven't already. So I think that's really important. Structured data, really good governance, making sure that the ability for these machines to really read this and understand what they're reading is super important. And then I think the other thing is, we've kind of been living in a world, keywords are more usually related to like attributes, like a pack size or a color or a consistency. And AI is more around answers. So moving from like a keyword kind of focus to an answer to a very specific question type of focus is where optimization is ultimately going to head. And understanding that AI measures on dimensions like the acceptance of a recommendation that it makes. So understanding that having really clear answers to specific questions really reward you and ultimately will get you surfaced, and then will ultimately pull you down the funnel as well and ultimately get transacted. So it's very, very interesting. And even the AI players themselves are really learning kind of the consumer behavior by category and how those are different and how you react and interact based on category. It's really interesting. So the other thing that we coach is, don't abandon your consumer insights right away. You're still going to really have to understand your consumers and your shoppers in a really robust way through the lens of your category, because ultimately that will end up translating into these AI environments in some way, shape, or form as well.
Yeah. All the playbooks, all the blueprints that marketers used for product discovery, a lot of it's changed and been blown out the window.
Yeah.
How well do you think they understand this shift? And, maybe more importantly, how often do they think about the shifts that are yet to come? Because this isn't over.
Yeah, well, I think this is really interesting. I think we're all learning together. I think because of the nature of our business and our interactions with a lot of technology players in general, we get a bit of a sneak peek as to what's going on. But it's moving so incredibly fast that we're just a little bit ahead of maybe where our clients are. And so we're all learning together to a certain degree. And I think the thing that we're finding is, in terms of their understanding, there's a lot of fear. Most people are predicting that this is going to be very disruptive. I think, in fact, unlike some of the other trends that we've had in, say, the past 5 to 10 years, where it's going to be the next big thing, and you're kind of like, well, if you just think about it a little bit, it's maybe not so much of a step change. I'm thinking like voice search and things like that. But this in fact, I think will be a change. And so what we've been driving at is, doing a lot of webinars and events, speaking about discovery, and really coaching people about understanding their target audiences, the insights that I just chatted about, using real sentiment, which they have if they're working with us or people like us, to power those environments, because that they will give you insight as to what questions that you need to answer or what solutions you can proffer with your brands and your products, and ensuring that you can actually address those different things. And I think the key thing to think about is that brands are still looking for shortcuts, and I don't really think there's going to be shortcuts here like there is in other elements of digital. I'm thinking mostly like in SEO, like prompt tricks, keyword tweaks, optimizing for a single model. I think that's really obsolete, because these are really dynamic models, and they're not going to reward clever optimization. They pick up on it. And what they pick up on the most and what helps them the most are credible inputs. And so if you're thinking about discovery shifting from search results to conversational guidance, anything that sounds like marketing copy is going to stand out immediately, and probably not in a good way. In an AI-driven discovery environment, what this does is it creates a clear divide between who wins and who loses. So ads can continue to buy placement, but AI does not reward that. It rewards belief and believability. And this is something that I think people really need to strive for. And so a lot of our conversations in terms of, the central part beyond like the data governance and being really good about your data structure is, understanding that discovery really relies on these credible inputs, and these credible inputs come from consumers and shoppers, real consumers and shoppers, and not just brand copy. And that's always really been true. Word of mouth has always been really important. And certainly it's powered our business model for the last 20 years. It just so happens it becomes even more important with the new modality that AI is enabling.
I'm curious whether you've had any conversations with clients of yours about the ChatGPT ads that are coming.
Yeah, I've had a number of conversations. I've also have spoken with ChatGPT and I've run through with their teams what that environment will look like. And I think it's really interesting the way it is structured, at least now. It's much more traditional than you would expect it to be. You kind of expect there's going to be some sort of dynamic and very creative kind of angle that they're coming at that space with, but it's really quite traditional and easy to understand at this point. And it doesn't look that different, except for what it's surrounded by, which is conversational guidance, than a lot of the other ads that you already see in digital environments. So it's going to be really interesting how that evolves. It won't stay that way, certainly. It's going to become a lot more dynamic. But right now, it's very, very traditional.
Ads alongside search results were a successful business model for a very long time. So why
exactly right? Yeah.
Why break away from it? Right?
Yeah, it's exactly right. And I think people are still a little bit scared, for example, about our data being used in some of these AI environments. And what we're really doing is we're playing at the application layer. That's most of our conversations around how do we just get the data into these environments that are an analog to the current retail environments. So a product detail page, is very traditionally as pack image. It's got, the product title, a few bullet points, and then has ratings, reviews, and supplementary images. Most of what, just like with the ad model that you're referencing with ChatGPT, looking very traditional, their current, view of what their e-commerce like environments look like looks very traditional. It's not scary. It's not using the data and manipulating the data in an interesting way. They just want to display it and be at parity with retail, at least for now. I'm sure they've got other ideas, I'm sure, and certainly the ability technologically to do some really interesting things. But right now, it seems to be very traditional what they're trying to do as they get up to speed.
All right, Doug Straton, he's the CMO of Bazaarvoice. Thanks for joining us on Conversations with MarTech.
Not at all. Thanks for having me, Mike.